I'm with Texas A&M Soil and Crop Science, and we're also with the umbrella of AgriLife Research. I work out at the Scott's Lawn and Garden facility for turfgrass and lawn and garden research, and I'm under Dr. Chase Straw, and I work with Dr. Worley and Dr. Chang, and we have several masters and doctorate students out here, and Bruce Vinto, and we just work everything for the university that's related to research and turfgrass.
And I know we kind of touched on that, your day-to-day is definitely a lot different than working on mounds and, edging, all that good stuff. But we're going to kind of tap into your previous experience. So tell us a little bit about, what you're bringing to the table in your past life.
Sure. Yeah, I started out in 2001 here at Texas A&M, and I started out on golf courses. I worked at the A&M golf course, and then I didn't really love it. I love baseball and softball and football and all that stuff. So I had a chance to transfer over to Pemberthy and with Bob Marcotte and Brian Carey. So I transferred over there and got into it and loved it. And I actually had an internship in Nebraska for a golf course, but I turned it down and ended up going to the San Antonio Missions under Tim Loesch and did an internship there. And then the next year I did an internship out at Albuquerque with Albuquerque Isotopes with Jared Alley, who's with the Twins now, and came back here and hid out in the parking lot and saw Leo Gertz get out of his truck and walked up to him and said, "Hey, I've got a resume. If you've got a job, I'd love to work for y'all." So took advantage of that, and I worked one semester on the field staff at Olson, and mainly at Olson. I did a little bit of everything. And then after graduation in 2006, I went to the University of Texas at Tyler. I was the head turf manager there for 7 years. And in 2013, I transferred to the University of Texas at Austin. And I know a lot of Aggies are going to give me grief on that, but I have to say it right sometimes. But worked there for 5 seasons on Mike A. Myers soccer and track facility, and then transferred over and worked 2 seasons at the Red and Charlene McCombs softball facility.
So that's even more of a mouthful. I was intimidated by your title, but the experience I definitely would have butchered. So I appreciate you giving us that background. So I guess what makes most sense is to kind of talk about maybe your last gig at the softball facility and really talk about mound maintenance and what that looked like. So my first question for you is, on a day-to-day basis, what were some of the techniques that you were performing to make sure that the mound and the surrounding areas were safe and playable for players?
Well, for both of them, for baseball and softball, they're both a little different. The softball, everything's relatively flat, and it depends on how your field is graded. At Tyler, the mound was our center point, and we kind of had a cone-shaped grade. But daily maintenance is the daily patching from practices or games, and a lot of people don't realize, but they walk back and forth from the back of the rubber to the back of the circle basically every pitch. So that whole area gets worn down really quick, especially when you play 10, 15 games over a 3 to 4 day period in a softball tournament. So you have to sweep out a lot of that, remove that loose material, front and back and the sides, and make sure it's moistened. Depending on what clay you're using, you want to make sure that you're getting a good bond with that, tamp everything out, and make sure that softball mound is as flat as possible. Because there's some coaches that will get really, really particular about it if they think that rubber is a little bit higher than everything else. And so it is a challenge, and they drag their toe. So there's huge scrapes, and over and over and over, you can get a 10, 11, 12 inch drag mark, and it takes a lot of clay to patch. And then on the baseball side, you have up at the rubber, you have where they bring their plant foot when they come set. You have their foot lands. You have behind the rubber where they stand a little bit sometimes, where they toe in. And if you're in a practice situation where you have PFPs and pick-off plays, sometimes you have to patch off on a little bit of that stuff. So it is a daily thing. And then you've got, like at Texas, we had 4 bullpens that always had to be patched, and 2 in baseball. And So you're going through a lot of clay on a daily basis and a lot of time. You can easily spend a couple of hours just on repairing, patching daily in that situation.
Yeah, it sounds like mound maintenance could be like a full-time job for just one person.
Sometimes it is, sometimes.
Definitely. So aside from, the day-to-day things or seasonal, what were you guys doing, before and after games just to make sure that, everything was kept up to par?
Before games, you really want to focus on that mound moisture, because once you get it all patched up and get everything repaired, if you let it dry out, then the patch job just blows out, and then you have a larger hole to repair, or you run the risk of, if you have a hole to start with, they're not getting a good firm footing, and dry mounds, people, they can't get their cleat in there very well. So you have to monitor that moisture, and it's the same for baseball and softball. Now, some people do use tarps. We did not use a tarp at softball because we patched either the day of or right after practice, knowing that we would have a practice the next morning. So we didn't ever have to really worry about that. But if they went out of town for a few days and we could get ahead of the game, we would patch, and then we'd throw a couple tarps down. But the moisture and the just that everyday care to make sure that everything stays uniform and the same, so that every time they step out there, that it's going to be the same, and that it can hold up to the plate. If you're too dry and you've got 5, 6, 7 pitchers sitting there doing PFPs or doing the same drill over and over, you're just going to end up chunking it out, and then you have to come in and make bigger repairs with the lack of moisture and care.
And a lot of wear and tear for sure. It sounds like it's not even what's going on during the game, but practice time and, prep time before the game. So how frequently were you guys, rebuilding your mound from scratch up? How frequently were you looking to kind of reconstruct the mound altogether?
Usually we tried to get at least one a year in. When I was at Tyler, I was by myself at Tyler, so I didn't have a lot of time or help. At Texas, we tried to do it twice a year. So we would try to do not a complete rebuild, but we would try to reconstruct a lot of it right before fall ball, because it had gone from the season, the summer leagues, and everything that goes on during the summer and camps. And we would reconstruct it a little bit in the fall, and then we would come in December as soon as fall ball is over, and we would really try to reconstruct everything at that point. At softball, it's not that complicated, but we would come in once a year and add clay material to the infield and get everything laser graded and bumped back up. We didn't have the tools necessary. I would have liked to have been able to do it after we would play 2 or 3 tournaments a year before we get into Big 12 play. I'd have loved to have been able to do that, but just didn't have the tools and the manpower at the time. So.
And what kind of, what does that look like resource wise as far, how long does it take, one person when they're a one-man band, to kind of rebuild the mound or reconstruct? And what does that look like budget wise?
It depends on how deep you want to go. At Tyler, I kind of cheated. I would host field days, and I would have. I worked with Ewing Irrigation sometimes, and I would purchase the material, and you're talking at least a bag of clay sometimes, I'm sorry, not a bag of clay, a ton of clay, and then that kind of gets into: do you use bricks? Do you use infill material? Do you use clay? So it just varied on what we were trying to achieve. There was one year where I absolutely hated the material that our mound was out of, so I had it ripped out, and I hired a company to come in and rebuild it for me. But I used the field day to my advantage because I was with Texas STMA, and so we had some contacts, and we reached out with Ewing, and we invited everybody out, and I worked with Ewing, and we rebuilt a game mound for them, and I got a free game mound out of it for the construction, but I had to pay for the material, so it helped out a lot. And we did it in a day because there was plenty of people who wanted to learn how to do it. So at Texas, it was a little different story, and we had, at the time, we were kind of in some transitioning. So, but it could take us 3 days to a week, just depending on weather. But we dug down 4 or 5 inches. We were dissatisfied with our clay material, and we were trying to change out. we were looking at changing over to some Dura-Edge black stick, and we dug down about 4 or 5 inches, and we just started dropping clay, and we'd drop clay and pack it, drop clay and pack it. And I want to say we went through to do our entire bullpen and game mound. We may have went through about 3 or 4 pallets of clay, but we got everything shaped up. We reshaped our tables and then this in our bullpen, it's 2 mounds put together. So, but we took out our table, we dug it down and brought that back up, replaced our rubbers. And it took a while. We had to fight some weather, and we had soccer going on, we had softball going on, so we didn't get to work on it all the time. But it's a challenge, and it does take some time. But when it's done right and when it's finished, it's really nice.
Definitely an undertaking. And that's great insight, because I think a lot of what we see is the final product. When it's all said and done, someone will put a photo up on social or something, and it's not always clear how much it goes into to produce that final product. So great insight there. And you kind of touched on some of the materials. And so I'd love to ask you to kind of whether it's your preference or just what you've utilized along the way, the differences between mound bricks to bagged clay to, the native clay that's found on the field, kind of what your preferences are and what people should consider when trying to just decide between the three.
Yeah, there's a lot of things to look at. You look at first, how much money do you have and what do you have available? Dura-Edge is a great product, and we knew that we were going to end up patching with Dura-Edge. So that's why we went ahead and spent the resources to dig it out and replace it with Dura-Edge, because everybody knows that if you're replacing with what you're using, you're always going to get a better bond, and you're going to be able to come in there and clean it up a little bit better. If you come in with a native clay and you're trying to bond it with another material, sometimes they just don't work well together, because the makeup, everybody talks about that magical number of 60-20-20 when it comes to infield material. But if you're using a clay that may have a different sand profile or a different silt profile, stuff just doesn't match up right. And so I really like to try to build out of what you're going to patch with, and we all know it's impossible. And at that point, the best thing is to experiment and reach out to your dealers and just let them know, hey, I'm got this material, I'm not happy with it. What do you have to offer me? And work in your bullpens and work on your mounds and just try a bag, and you'll eventually find something that works out well. I have a product that I used in the past that I love. It worked great all the time, but it wasn't right for us, because we would play double headers on Saturday and tournaments. And at the end of the day, it was just a powdery mess. And we would have to scrape our mounds after a whole weekend. And that throws you having to use a little bit more turfus than you want. You can't get that moisture down in your game mound the way you want, just because that powder kind of makes it go hydrophobic. And it's a great product, but it just wasn't right for our situation. So we had to start looking and change. And we fought that at Texas. We were not able to use the black stick over at softball like we thought we were going to. It was a situation just because of how we do pregame, and we put a huge batting mat down, and then also we had a lot of shade back there. So if any moisture was in the ground behind home plate, it would just be soaking wet at the start of the game. And we knew that. And with the Dura-Edge, we were a little scared, and we were afraid that we would never get it dry. So we had to use a different clay, even though we were using kind of a Dura-Edge Southern Athletic Field combination. And that's just some things that you run into. And it's the same way on the mounds. Sometimes you're doing PFPs in practice, and they put a mat down that's got a rubber backing on it, and it'll suck that moisture up. So you got to know your situation. And that's just where you have to do your research, and you got to look around. We didn't use them at Texas, but I did at Tyler. Bricks, and I love bricks. I think they definitely have their advantage. We used them at Olson the year I worked there. And the reason I like bricks is because I like to build a little bit bigger table than most people do. I had success at Tyler with that, where if I had a platform for them to kind of get up there, they would have their conversations up there on that mound a little bit. And yes, there are rules, supposed rules of what a table's supposed to be, but if I could find out a way to make it a little bit bigger and I could get a pitcher, a pitching coach, and a catcher, that's where they kind of tend to migrate up there versus standing in the grass. So protects your lips, protects the wear, and that's kind of my thing. I always liked a bigger table. We rebuilt the mound at Texas 2 years ago. I kind of pushed for it, but they didn't want it. The pitching coach wanted the table the way it was, and he liked it. So, and that's your thing and his thing. So you have to compromise and make sure the coach is happy. But if you communicate and say, hey, I'm going to build this table a little bit bigger. What do you think? And would you like that? And kind of map it out and show them, they might let you do that. And that was just the way I kind of approached the situation.
Yeah, so it sounds like so many factors are, in play there, whether it's location, coach's preference, past experience, different products, budget, time, all those good things. So it's definitely about trying what you're able to and kind of figuring out what works best for you. So I love that. So last question for you, with mound maintenance, what kind of techniques were you utilizing for the surrounding areas right around the mound, just to make sure that they were safe and playable, whether that was putting conditioner down or a different moisture strategy? What were you kind of using to make sure everything was, up to par there?
The first thing I would do after every game and was sweep those lips where that clay and that turfus gets out in there. At Texas, we had synthetic, so that was a little different situation. We fought that a lot, but at Tyler, I had the team would help me out some, so they would patch. And when we were up doing the main patching, then there was a player that knew they needed to sweep the edges. They needed to have a plastic grass rake getting those chunks in there because we'll sift it out at the end of the day. And that just helps keep that clay from building up in your lip and killing out your grass a little bit. So that was kind of my number one thing that I would do. And then once we got everything patched up, and for me, when the team went out of town, I tried at Tyler, I would try to check my slope as often as I could because, again, we had students and players that were doing the patching at the end of practice on the weekday. And they're not thinking about, does that slope properly angled right? So when they would go out of town for a weekend series, I would bring out the slope gauge and try to clean everything up and make sure it's good. So I would scrape everything and get all the old turfus off. And I would spend, a day or two sometimes just flooding the mound completely, just trying to get as much water down in there and making sure that I could get as much moisture down in that profile built up. And then I would come in and we would use our slope gauge and make sure that our slope was on par and where it should be. And then we'd bring out our turfus. And for me, I've changed, and I say turfus, but my calcine clay. I know that's the generic term. Everybody says that, but I've used everything. And it goes back again to what, one, you can afford, what you like, what you're trying to achieve. Nick does a great job with achieving that Yankee look. But that's two different products. So that's more product you got to buy. And at the end of the day, when you scoop that all up and then to sift it out, you got to start over. So I didn't have that budget luxury at Tyler, and at Texas, they didn't want that. They wanted one color. And so, A&M's different here where, they like that look, and that's great. It looks great. It's fantastic. And if you can afford it and do it, and provide that, that's a great touch to add. But at Tyler, we didn't have that. So we were looking to what was going to hold the most moisture through a doubleheader on Saturday and give us what we needed it to do. So we'd put out our calcine clay and spread it out real even. And then I like to use a broom, take the broom flipped over and kind of smooth everything out, make sure you get all your rake lines out, and you can do the circle or front to back, side to side, and just kind of cleans everything up, and then get that good shot of moisture on it. And from that point, you're just keeping your moisture on it, whether you want to put a heavy coat and put a tarp down, or if you just want to leave it uncovered for the day and just keep hitting it different times during the day with a light coat, whatever. And it's all weather based. You can have a cloudy, cold day and you can water 2 times, or you can have a hot sunny day with wind blowing 30 miles an hour and you can't get enough water on it at all. So just depending on what you're trying to achieve and what your weather pattern is for that day, all changes what you're going to do.
Definitely. You're definitely full of tricks of the trade, and with baseball season, underway, do you miss it, or what inspired you to make the change, go on to the research side, and tell us a little bit about the position that you're in now and how it differs.
I do miss it. It was a long part of my life for a long time. Like I said, I started in probably 05 was when I got into actual baseball, and I did it all the way up to July of 2020. So it's been part of my life, and it's been part of my family's life for a real long time. And my wife absolutely loves baseball, and my daughter she's about to turn 2 in June, and she can already say baseball, and she can already chant the ball 5 and ball 6 chant when A&M's playing. So it's been a part of our lives, and we went to as many games as we could. So I do miss that aspect of it, but it is nice knowing that when the games wrap up at 9 or 10 o'clock, that I'm not still working. I can go to bed. But for me, just the opportunity to come here was kind of a lifelong dream. I always wanted to work for the soil and crop research. And a lot of people never really realized that, but I always thought that they were doing the research. I really, really enjoyed Dr. Richard White, when he was here, and just seeing the research and kind of some of the stuff they did, that was something that interested me. And when I came down here, I sat in Dr. Chase Straw's presentation when they were looking at hiring him. And as soon as I heard it, I was like, man, I want to be a part of that. And I approached him and I told him, I said, I've got a field. You tell me what you want to do. You're more than welcome, and we'll do any research you want to do. But at the same time, I kind of approached Dr. Worley, and I had told him, and I knew Bruce was here, and I knew that he was an older gentleman, and I said, that's my retirement gig. That's what I want to do. And I approached Dr. Worley, and I said, if you're ever looking to hire somebody, I'd really like to come work out here. This is what I'd like to do, and this is where I kind of see myself in the. People don't think you really start thinking about retirement at 37, but I kind of was, because I knew where I wanted to be in life, and to kind of slow down once I get to that retirement age. And a few months later, they both reached out and were like, "Hey, we think would you be interested if we were to open a position?" And I said, "Yes, definitely. Let's talk." So that's how I got here, and my family loves it. We love College Station. It was hard working for Texas, being an Aggie, but my dad played football at A&M, and that was one of the scariest things in the world for me, was to have to tell him that I wanted to apply for a job at A&M, and he's like, "Son, take the job." And so, I got the blessing, as they say, and so it was a great job. It was a great time at A&M. We had a great time, or at Texas. We had a great time at Texas, but we were ready to move on. My daughter was born in 19, and I was just kind of, you do change when you have kids. And so I was ready to try to spend some more time with my family. And so that presented this opportunity for us, and we're blessed and thankful for it.
Well, that sounds like a dream, and I'm happy that you and your family have found a home in this new position. That sounds great. We wish you guys all the best, for sure. And thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate you, talking about your previous experience and sharing some of those insights that you gathered along the way. And anytime I unmuted myself, I was hoping my son wasn't screaming, like you couldn't hear him screaming in the background, because he's downstairs right now screaming, and I'm excited to see what's going on when I go down to check on him.
Yeah.